Welcome to Art After Dark. My name is Gladys Ramirez. I'm the Director of Audience Engagement here at the Norton Museum of Art. The Norton marks its 80th year anniversary in 2021. What's the Story invites neighboring cultural and community organizations to mark the occasion by sharing their distinguished histories and what's ahead. Tonight's guest is Dr. Alisha Winn. Dr. Winn has a Ph.D. in applied cultural anthropology. She serves as a consultant and director for several community and heritage education projects, and she is a board member for the City of West Palm Beach Mayor's Task Force for Racial and Ethnic Equality and the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. She'll be discussing the iconic jazz venue, the Sunset Lounge, and highlights the rich history of the predominantly African-American community of the Northwest District. This is presented as part of the Norton Celebrating Black Florida series, presented throughout the month of June here at the Norton. We invite you to join the conversation and ask questions using the live chat features on YouTube and Facebook. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Winn.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Again, I'm Dr. Alisha Winn, applied cultural anthropologist. And today I'm going to talk about the historic Northwest District and the Sunset Lounge. I am a CRA consultant, that is the West Palm Beach Community Redevelopment Agency. And the work that I do is consultant and community engagement work in the historic Northwest. So I'm very excited to share about the history of this particular neighborhood and the historic Sunset Jazz Lounge. Next slide. So the historic Northwest District was one of South Florida's first African-American settlements from the 1920s to the 1930s due to, in part, to legally enforced segregation. In West Palm Beach, the Negro Segregation Ordinance was proposed by the City Commission in 1929, established the Negro section to extend from Clematis Street to 23rd Street between Railroad and Clear Lake. Originally, its bounds stretched as far south as Fern Street and north to 23rd Street, from Seaboard Railroad to Florida East Coast Railroad. Named the National Register of Historic Places in 1992, today the historic boundaries extends from 2nd Street to 15th Street. However, amongst the CRA district, the historic Northwest boundaries extends from Banyan to Palm Beach Lakes, West Tamarind Avenue to east to Rosemary Avenue. Next slide. So in this historic and particularly African-American community, just to give a little bit more history about this area and other areas of Black areas in the West Palm Beach area. So in the late 1800s, over 1,000 Black families were hired to work the island of Palm Beach, setting up residence in an area called the Sticks. And these workers came to assist extending the Florida East Coast Railroad from Juneau to West Palm Beach, building the Royal Poinciana Hotel and Whitehall for the Standard Oil magnate land developer Henry Morrison Flagler. But with many wealthy owners realizing the value of the land, by 1913 of the completion of certain buildings in the areas, Sticks residents were pushed out and settling in Pleasant City and the historic Northwest. Next slide. But however, in the historic Northwest District, this community had several successful businesses. It was a community that was the epitome of Black success, with Black firsts and business owners like architect Hazel Augustus, the first Black doctor, Dr. T. Leroy Jefferson at the bottom right, midwife Mildred Gildersleeve, and owner and millionaire James Cracker Johnson. The community, along with several surrounding communities, thrived despite segregation laws and discrimination. But in this segregated space, these communities had what they needed, and they impacted the entire city and the county. Next slide. So during segregation, Black entertainers toured a string of nightclubs called and known in the South as the Chitlin Circuit. And the Sunset Roof Garden and Grill actually opened in 1926 in the historic Northwest District. It was originally built in 1923 as a first floor service station with auto storage, a gas pump, and the second floor roof garden grill. The Sunset Royale nightclub came to fruition in 1933 as an entertainment venue envisioned by Robert L. Saunders. However, the late Dennis and Thelma Starks owned the Sunset Cocktail Lounge for 50 years, purchasing it in the 1940s. Next slide. Building upon the existing concrete block structure, the Sunset was enhanced to include a first floor bar and a lounge in the second floor ballroom with a mezzanine level and an elevated stage. Next slide. Identified as one of the largest ballrooms was the Sunset in West Palm Beach. The Sunset Cocktail Lounge was the Cotton Club of the South in the 1950s. Next slide. And the Sunset Lounge featured great African-American musicians such as Count Basie, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Berry Gordy, and Doc Wheeler. Next slide. And it became a popular live entertainment venue in the 1930s. These associated events made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of jazz and big band history. Next slide. And the club drew top bands and hundreds of patrons in the 1940s and in the 1950s. Next slide. The downstairs lounge changed with the times and graduated from big bands to music as it continued to draw musicians like James Brown, Ike and Tina Turner, Jimmy Bohorn, and even Sam Cooke. Next slide. The Sunset provided a space for many performing artists, concert goers, and fans could purchase tickets at the Sunset Lounge for even other venues. And as you can see, there's so many examples all the way from the 1930s all the way up until the 1980s where this happened. Next slide. So by 2014, it was called the Sunset Lounge, a lounge and a bar on the first floor occupied in operation. Apartments on the second floor and third floors were unoccupied, in which at some point in time in the 70s, the second floor was turned and the third floor were turned into apartment complexes, but they were unused by this time, by the 2000. Next slide. At the Sunset Lounge, different generations shared the same space, and local people chilled weekly, ending their day with good music, good food, good conversation, live bands, and events, and working to ensure this vibe continues even as we go into what's happening today with the Sunset Lounge. Next slide. And so the Sunset Lounge was also, in general, a symbol of music, place, and connectivity. There were multiple activities and functionings of the historic and iconic place in the Northwest community. The Sunset Lounge was more than a space for just a lounge and musical entertainment. The Sunset Lounge was not simply a bar, but a space to connect and experience our culture in music, food, and social networks. The Sunset Lounge was a center for social events, organizing, community awareness, activism, and even neighborhood building. Historically, it has been also a place for debutante balls and community awareness and even friendships at the center of these community events. Next slide. And so as we look at the historic Northwest, by 2018, the Sunset Lounge closed for renovation. And as a part in efforts from the CRA, the Community Redevelopment Agency, there was the Historic Northwest Rising Project. And the Historic Northwest Rising Project was an initiative to revitalize the Sunset Lounge and the surrounding areas. And there was a campaign to inform the neighborhood about the lounge and get the community's input about what they would like to see in the lounge and the surrounding areas. Next slide. And so with various efforts with the CRA and community engagement, we had what is called the Design Your Park. And for this campaign, we continue to contact residents and get them involved about what they would like in the open space across the street from the Sunset Lounge. Next slide. And so undergo right now, from these past few years and today, we started Sunset Lounge renovations. Next slide. And so here's an example of just some of the plans of the open space, because from the community's input, they gave input about what they would like to see, how they would like the park to feel, what type of visuals, what type of historic things they would like to see in the park to tell the history of the community, as well as the design of the modern Sunset Lounge. Next slide. And as you can see today, there is a completion of the Sunset. We're in the completion of the park, actually, the Heart and Soul Park. It is completed now, and it is open for people to visit and to see, and for the community to see where their input came into play on this park. And as well as on the right, you see the renovations and the continued building of or renovations of the Sunset Lounge. Next slide. And although the Sunset is temporarily closed, we are preserving this history. And most importantly, in capturing the stories of the wonderful people that make the Sunset and the historic Northwest community great, with residents, buildings, and business owners, community and city leaders. We still continue to build this great neighborhood and preserve its rich history to ensure neighborhood resources, making it secure and economically stable for the residents, as you can see on this slide, the Northwest Residents in Action, which are the residents living and working in our community. And now, next slide. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to any questions that you might have. And let's bring Gladys back for the discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Winn. That was like a really quick overview at, I guess, like, almost 90 years, right, of the Sunset Lounge?
Yes.
I'm really interested in hearing how the Northwest District became, and you're a cultural anthropologist, so this may or may not be within your realm of knowledge, but how did it come to be that the historic Northwest District became such a hub of important community in Americans the last 100 years?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat your question?
Sure. Sorry if I'm having like a technical difficulty here. But my question was, can you talk a little bit about how it came to be that specifically this area of the Northwest District became such a hub for the African American community?
Well, it became that way, one, because it had to, because when you talk about the 1929 Ordinance, where people of color were forced to live in certain areas. And so the historic Northwest and many others surrounding areas like Coleman Park, as well as Pleasant City, that was the only place where Black people could actually live. And by law, they were confined to live in that space. So within that space, you see the development of, you see establishment of businesses, and like some of my elders would say, we had everything we needed. So they had their own doctors, their own dentists, their own grocery stores. And so you see in this what people would call this Black Mecca, this hub, and particularly those three major commercial streets like Rosemary Avenue, Sapodilla, and Cameron Avenue, where all the businesses were right there. And so they made it work, and they triumphed in the midst of this segregated space, and were very successful in doing so.
Wow. And I know we're all aware of the new construction and all these things happening, not just in the Northwest district, but also in the surrounding areas. How is the community kind of facing issues of like gentrification, if there are any? How is it being? I guess there was a time where that African American community was forced to be there, but now maybe are they still able to keep their homes, keep their roots planted where they is, or is that becoming a challenge for the residents there now?
Well, and that's a concern because in the historic Northwest uh, district, it is over 90% or about 90% rental properties and less than 10% home ownership. So you think about that. That is a major, major, major
Wow.
chunk of people that are not, don't own their own properties. And so
You
you
don't have that
can
generational wealth. You don't have that extra. Yeah.
no, you actually don't. And there is a concern, particularly for residents. I am a resident, so I actually I could see, the development happening right before my eyes and, kind of get a feel of how people feel in this space where, you're particularly if you are a renter and you don't own your own home, but and so you have questions about what's going to happen to me. Is the property value going to go up? Am I going to be able to afford living here? These are questions. And so, these are things that, the CRA and even some area departments in the city is talking about of how do you, in the midst of redevelopment, how do you maintain the residents living there? It's people that want to stay there. They want to see, but sometimes, redevelopment could be associated with something negative versus another person or another institution look at that as something very positive, or like we're building, but that might mean something very different to the people living there, particularly if you don't own your own home. So, and so there is this, are these questions. And so we've been talking a lot about that, of how, you utilize that and even do, whether it's home ownership education or finding out what properties may be available for home ownership and housing for people to stay, or even looking at policies, particularly housing policies or absentee landlord policies, to ensure that people are not just simply pushed out because we got new things in the neighborhood.
Right. Well, it's really a testament to the people that develop that community that it's become such an anchor. And I wonder, so what made West Palm so special that all of these famous artists were coming down and performing here? And, was it just because of the Sunset Lounge?
Well, it was, that Chitlin circuit is, these big bands, these great artists, would go on this Chitlin circuit, and particularly in the South, and go from city to city or juke joint to juke joint, or, jazz club to jazz club to play. And remember that this was during, segregation and Jim Crow laws. And so there was a boundary that these artists, these famous artists that are nationally and internationally known, they still had limitations of where they could go and where they could live. So the Sunset Lounge, given that it was in this segregated space, and those artists had to be confined to that same space as well, even where they, take up residence during those days that they were playing in the Sunset Lounge. And so it became this hub, just like the neighborhood became this hub place of, solid, very strong place. The Sunset Lounge, even before the Sunset Lounge, there was another establishment that was built by Robert Saunders, and then there was a massive fire that burnt the building down. So when the Sunset Lounge was rebuilt when the
Northwest District that was?
Yes, in the Northwest District, Robert Saunders had actually I think it was called the Palm Garden Drugstore, but then he also wanted to, Black life and entertainment really started in 1926, and it began with Mr. Saunders and other artists too, like James Cracker Johnson, who was a millionaire and real estate owner. He had his own bar. There were several nightclubs and jazz spaces, but the Sunset Lounge was built for stability to prevent from a fire to destroy it. And so, as you can see, the Sunset Lounge it has a lot of staying power, but it had to do with how it was built to ensure that it did not get destroyed again. And as you can see, it still existed. And so these artists, they came through and in and out, but because those are some of the places where they were accepted, there were no limitations even within that space. Now, outside of that, there were, but this is what they did on this Chitlin circuit, and this is what they were bound to. And when they took up residence in the Northwest. They couldn't go to some nice other hotel outside in the white community. So It just kind of had this stew of like greatness, of these artists and business owners, and it didn't mean that whites were not could not come to the Sunset Lounge, because they did. But as far as being a person of color, there were such major limitations, but it's still they still exceeded this idea of what was bound upon them despite that. And so the Sunset Lounge is a testament and a pillar of, or representation of excellence, and nationally. So it is on the map. It's considered, the Cotton Club of the South. That's a big deal to be established as that. And so we're really looking forward to its renovations and its restorations. As I said, it was closed in 2018 for renovations, and we're looking by next year for the Sunset Lounge to be completed. And but the park is done, so we're excited about that, and we're excited that the community gave their input in how they wanted that space to look, and so they get a chance to see that right now, and even our event on tomorrow, to our ribbon cutting on tomorrow to celebrate that success.
Can you talk a little bit about that really quick, since you mentioned it, for our audience to know? So tomorrow is the ribbon cutting of?
Yes, the tomorrow is the ribbon cutting of the opening of the Heart and Soul Park. And as I stated, that the Heart and Soul Park was done by, or given input by, the actual community and stakeholders. So we had a series of about 3 meetings in the community to give their input of how they would like to feel when they walk in this space. And so they went through various exercises. They drew different pictures about trees and piano keys and musical instruments, and that's what you're going to see, exactly what they described of what they would like to feel and see when they go to this park. And so and that is just the beginning, and also when we did the historic Northwest Rising project, we got a lot of input about what they would like to see in the Sunset and outside of the Sunset. And so that park was built with in mind what the people would like to see and the type of functionings they wanted, they wanted to function, and the activities they'll be able to have in that space. And so the ribbon cutting is tomorrow. The actual event is the community event starting at 10:30 on tomorrow at the Heart and Soul Park on 8th and what you can say 8th and 7th and Rosemary, or 8th and Rosemary, because it's between 7th and 8th and Rosemary.
It takes up a good
spot. Yes, it takes up a whole block, an entire block. And so it starts at 10:30. The ribbon cutting is at 11 a.m. And then we'll have a series of performances, and we'll have a series of tables that represents of the city representatives, because the initial goal for this is to really get the residents of the neighborhood involved. And so we will have set up tables of different departments set up at the table. So if the residents have any questions questions, say for instance, about code enforcement, if they have questions about sanitation, they can go to these different tables to get information and get questions answered. So it's multiple things going on in this event. So you got the ribbon cutting at 11, but throughout the day, all the way until 3:30, you can engage with different city department representatives. We'll have performances. We'll have history, little snippets of history about Juneteenth all throughout the park. And then we'll have music, fun. We'll have food out there. And so it's really a really big celebration on multiple things of just the success of and resilience of a neighborhood like this that has been through so many changes, but they're still here. And so we're very excited about tomorrow.
Is there anything like the heart and soul right now for the neighborhood? Or are we coming back? Is this like part of the new chapter?
Yes, we're coming back, because what's really important is, because I really, even with this presentation and being on the line, I want to show that even though there were changes, people still continue to live in the neighborhoods. People still continue to thrive. There's still businesses that are on Rosemary. There's still businesses on Sapodilla. There's still businesses on Cameron. So I really want to dispel any myth that neighborhood is just downhill. But it did need some redevelopment and some support. And so we have that. And so it is just bringing more things back that has always been there. It's just enhanced, and the Sunset Lounge has always been open. It up until 2018. And I remember being in the Sunset Lounge. So you have like generations of people that have an experience of the Sunset Lounge, which is so exciting in itself that, you can talk to someone who's 80 that has a story about their experiences at the Sunset Lounge. And then you have a 25-year-old that can tell you their experience of the Sunset Lounge if they attended the Sunset Lounge before 2018. So it has such a rich history, and these stories are more than just the Cap Calloway stories. It might be the James Brown stories, or it may be the Kenny Lattimore R&B artist story for multiple generations to experience. And that is what makes it great. That we're bringing it back, but then there are major portions that have always been there, and we're celebrating that on tomorrow and this next year once it gets the Sunset Lounge gets completed.
That's really fabulous. And, in a time where we're in a tear down and build something new kind of world, it's really nice that they're taking so much care to really bring a new life to something that's been in existence for so long. And so I guess for the future of the Sunset Lounge in, 2022, 2023, what am I going to see there? Is it going to be a music venue? Is there going to be a bar? Is it just going to be rentals for people's weddings? What's going to happen there now?
Well, so the goal is to restore the Sunset Lounge back to as close to its original state as possible, right? But then you also have the modern part of it too. And so if you saw the image of it was a kind of a building connected to it to the right of it, that is the modern part of that, where it will have an elevator, because the Sunset Lounge never had an elevator. It was just stairs. Okay. And the Sunset Lounge never had a restaurant. So it was just a bar, and if you had food, you would bring food inside, but it was never a restaurant. So now this new modern Sunset, you will have an elevator, you will have a restaurant. So on the first floor, it will be a bar and a restaurant. On the second floor, it will be restored back to its ballroom on the second floor. And it also on the third floor, you'll have the mezzanine, where you can look down from the mezzanine to look down into the ballroom. And then there will be an open deck that's in the new space that is that will be on the east side of the Sunset Lounge, where it's an open space outside, because it had a roof garden originally. So you're going to experience some of that roof garden on the new side of the Sunset Lounge that we have. So it is going to be really a really nice thing. So you'll have a modern flair to it, but you still have some of that historic structure and of those 3 floors that it originally had before. And I mean, and it's a, and I'm excited in the sense of particularly those who frequent the Sunset Lounge, maybe in the 50s and the 60s. Like my mom, she had her debutante cotillion ball at the Sunset Lounge on the second
Really?
floor in the ballroom. And so they're going to recreate this ballroom, and hopefully people like my mother's generation can experience that all over again, of that ballroom experience that was there before in the
Wow.
past. Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. And like you were saying, like the history, it's not just, oh, I saw Tina play there. It's like, mom met dad there, or, my grandfather used to go there. And like
Yes.
those kinds of stories are so much part of what made, I think, the Sunset Lounge
Yes.
special. And it seems like the neighborhood is really participating, really embracing.
Yes.
And it sounds like welcoming, because as you said, redevelopment, it needs funding and
Yes.
it needs the will. So it sounds like it's a priority for the city, at least. So how do we keep track of what's next with the Sunset Lounge? Do we check a website?
Yes, you can check. If you go to the city's website, you can go to the CRA, the Community Redevelopment website, and you can see updates. They also have an electronic newsletter that you can subscribe to. If you go to the CRA website, if once you get on the city websites, look for the CRA, Community Redevelopment Agency, and it'll give you updates, and you can subscribe to the e-newsletter, and it gives what's happening, not just with the Sunset Lounge, but the redevelopment that's happening throughout the neighborhood, because the Sunset Lounge is just one of many buildings and things being redeveloped. You have Sticks Promenade, where you have businesses that's going to be built to right across from the Sunset Lounge in the Heart and Soul Park. They have the restoration of the Mickens home. That is a historic home, and then even restoring some historic buildings and historic homes throughout the Northwest. So if you go to the CRA site, you'll see, and you connect to that e-newsletter, you'll see about what's next and what's coming up next. And so,
and that includes all the events like tomorrow's ribbon cutting that are open to the community and all that.
Yes, even if you go to the city sites, the first thing that pops up is the ribbon cutting. So it's a big deal. The mayor will be there for the ribbon cutting, and so very important people, which is the community that's going to be behind him and supporting him, because this is I always say that it's important to be intentional. When you're doing community engagement and getting the community involved, you have to be intentional, and then you have to consider the culture. You have to consider the history. You're dealing with a neighborhood who has a history of so many changes. You have a history of lack of trust because of not sure about what's going to happen to them, and you have to consider those things. And so
and the origins of the neighborhood,
right, and that's important. So you can't just come in and just say, oh, I'm going to build this, but you also need to understand the actual people and get on the ground and talk to the actual residents, and then really also make sure that their basic needs are being met, because it doesn't make sense to spend millions of dollars on a nice pretty building if the neighborhood is not having its basic needs met. Do they have lighting? Do they have are they safe? Are we tackling the issues of illegal dumping, or whatever that might be, because that neighborhood wants the needs met just like any other neighborhood. So those are the type of things that is important when you're going into a neighborhood and doing development or redevelopment, making sure that everybody is at the table, particularly those who it's going to impact the most, and that it's the residents too. So you have layers of what you call community. You got the residents, you got our elders who grew up in the neighborhood, but they no longer live in the neighborhood, but they have this historical tie, so they feel like it's their neighborhood too, just as much as a resident who lives there. Then you have business owners who have a business there. You have people who attend church there or have, with faith-based, but they may not live in it, but they have a connection to it because they attend church there. Then you got community organizations. So it's all these different layers of community that has to be involved in this process of redevelopment.
Wow. You do such important work, and thank you so much for sharing about the Sunset Lounge and the historic Northwest District. And I'm sure you're going to find a ton of people out there tomorrow night for the ribbon cutting. It's really exciting. Please, please join RA and the mayor tomorrow if you're available at the historic Northwest District.
Yes, please do. Please come on out. It'll be all tons of fun, a lot of history, a lot of excitement, and a celebration.
And more to come.
And more to come. Yes.
Yeah.
So
all right, Dr. Winn,
thank
you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you for having me.
And thank all of you for tuning in. If you'd like to see our upcoming Art After Dark programs, Art After Dark being a weekly Friday night program, please check out our website at norton.org. We'll see you next time.